In every artistic medium, you're going to have defining works that will change the way you perceive any other work in that medium going forward. For me, the album East by Joanna Newsom, the American movie by Chris Smith and Sarah Price, and the video game Earthbound were all examples of that. Things that I experienced, and then going forward, I was sort of looking back at that formative piece of art and interpreting anything new that I came across kind of through the lens of that thing. For board games, it was Food Chain Magnate, Splotter's 2015 hit. It really got into my brain and is, in a lot of ways, responsible for the types of games that I like now. When I first got into the hobby, Twilight Imperium was sort of the Mount Everest of big, complex, immersive games. It was a giant box full of a million pieces and promised this big, grand space opera, and I couldn't imagine anything being bigger or more complicated than that. Eventually I played it, and I actually liked it quite a lot, but I was left feeling a little disappointed. It felt kind of small. I interpreted those themes and those mechanics relatively quickly, and they were actually kind of simple. There were a lot of mechanics. I mean, don't get me wrong, Twilight Imperium isn't like a light throwaway game. It takes a long time to play, and it's got a lot of stuff for you to remember. But it felt really straightforward in a lot of ways. Make units, move them to attack other units, try to get points by completing objectives. It didn't quite take me out of the game and into something greater. It really kept my mind on the mechanical systems that the game offered. And then I came across High Frontier. A smaller box, fewer pieces, a lower price point, and a shorter playing time. And yet, High Frontier gave me that sense of wonder and it just made my imagination run wild in the way that Twilight Imperium promised, High Frontier delivered on. So Food Chain Magnate may have been that first step into the world of complex board games, but I think High Frontier probably synthesized all the things that I wanted in a game into one package. And High Frontier 4 is probably the best the game has ever been. So if you're new to High Frontier, I'm not going to be doing a rules overview or anything here. That'll be for a different video. But what I can do is give you kind of a broad overview of what the game is. In the game, each player is playing as a head of a space agency on Earth. And you are trying to take off from Earth and build factories out on different sites in the solar system. There's an auction for rocket parts, there are variable player powers, and the game has a ton of mechanics to support the robust simulation that Phil Eklund has created. There are dice in the game, one dice, a d6, and you will use that for passing through dangerous sections of the solar system, for determining the strength of solar flares, and you will use it for laying claim to different sites in the solar system. Now I'm going to tell you straight away, I am going to use the term site and planet interchangeably. The vast majority of the places you go in this game are not planets, but like comets, asteroids, things like that. However, I have this problem where I keep saying planet when I'm referring to things in the game, and so if I say planet, it might scientifically not be a planet. I'm sorry, I'll try my best not to say that. Now, the game has a very easy litmus test for if you like it or not. At least in my experience, it's been a pretty good litmus test. Basically, take a look at this map. If you see this and you think, oh boy, then maybe High Frontier is not for you. The map is wild and the game is appropriately wild. However, if you see the map and you think, okay, that's something, tell me a little bit more about what I'm looking at here, then maybe High Frontier will be for you, because the map is the most intimidating thing in this game. So if you're confronted with this and you want to know more, you might be in good company. That being said, High Frontier 4, officially known as High Frontier 4 All, tries to bring newcomers into the game a little bit more easily than previous editions. There are variants that you can play that will break down the systems into a form that you can grab onto pretty fast. There are a couple of those variants. The earliest, the earliest intro level one is called Space Diamonds. In it, you are largely just flying around, spending fuel on your rocket, and uncovering these chits that are attached to different sites. You get points for taking those, as well as for completing missions that you are given at the onset of the game. I've played it with some newcomers, people that have played High Frontier once and didn't really enjoy or get it, and people that have never even heard of High Frontier. And they've all enjoyed the game. They've all enjoyed Space Diamonds. If someone is brand new to the game and they're interested in High Frontier, they see that map and they pass that litmus test of, hey, I want to check this out, I might even say jump into the next, intro variant, Race for Glory, which is essentially the basic game from High Frontier 3rd Edition, if you're familiar at all. If you're not, it is the full High Frontier game, except it strips out some of the mechanisms. But you're still participating in auctions, you are still rolling dice to claim sites, you're still doing all the things that High Frontier has you do normally, building factories, going through, a Sol cycle for tracking turns, which Space Diamonds gets rid of a lot of that stuff. And that's where I think Space Diamonds might fail in regards to getting people into the big thing, is that it only really teaches you about movement. And I think that Race for Glory would teach that just fine. Again, I'm not saying Space Diamonds is bad. I just don't know that it will lead smoothly into the rest of the systems of High Frontier, because movement is not the hardest part of this game. The hardest part of this game is kind of taking it all in together. Valuing things in an auction can be really tricky. Calculating how much fuel you will need to get to a site, and if you fail, have a contingency plan to get to another site. That's kind of a hard thing to figure out. The actual mechanisms for moving, which is what Space Diamonds hammers in, is maybe not the hard thing. And I do commend Yoon Munker, the person that made Space Diamonds, for what he made, but I still feel like maybe your Race for Glory will be the best way to get someone into the game. And if someone's not interested in High Frontier, maybe get them to try Space Diamonds if you are really that kind of person that wants to convince someone to try something they don't want to try. Maybe Space Diamonds would be a good intro, but I would probably mostly recommend going right into Race for Glory. Alright, so let's go over some pros and cons for High Frontier. So one big pro is the game has a sense of wonder and intrigue like maybe nothing else I've ever played. Putting together your first rocket, plotting your first mission, and figuring out the most efficient route is exhilarating the first time you do it. The potential for failure at almost every step is very, very prevalent. And if you pass through all those difficult barriers and land on your first site and successfully lay claim to it, oof, boy howdy, do you feel accomplished. Every game I've played of this, and I've played like 24 games now, every game, that first success is a rush. It feels so good. And not many games give you that same feeling. Because in High Frontier, your accomplishments very strongly feel like something that you personally have earned. Nothing is handed to you. You don't draw a card and it says you did it. You have to put these things together. You have to work this puzzle out in your head of how to make a rocket that can not only be fuel efficient and get you to the site you're trying to get to, but also how does that butterfly effect into the rest of the game. Because cards are tied to certain site types, if you want to upgrade them, you need to be planning, okay, I have this card that has a C spectral type. Do I want other cards that get C spectral types? Or am I going to use this kind of incidentally to upgrade a different set of cards and then pick up a new thruster later on that isn't a C type? There's a whole lot of putting pieces together, and when they do come together, you feel super, super smart and like you did such a good job, because you did. Success in High Frontier is difficult, and so when you end up succeeding, you feel so good. However, the game also has very low lows. You need to be able to dig yourself out of the dirt. If you are struggling to get something going, or you inevitably miscalculate how much fuel you need to get to a site, you're going to have to scrap everything most likely and start over. And that can be tough, but you know what? Without those deep lows, you don't get those really rich highs. And High Frontier is the perfect example of that, and why that is a successful design decision in a board game. High Frontier is also shockingly social. It is not a game I expected to have so much social dynamics in it, but it does. It has a competitive auction that is sort of a free-for-all and works in kind of an interesting way. Someone puts a card up for auction, and then every player gets to bid on it. There's no order. It's not like clockwise bidding order. It's whoever wants to bid can bid. And if you win the auction and you're the one that put it up for auction, what happens is what you expect to happen. You pay your money, you get your card, and maybe a couple bonus cards. However, if I were to put a thruster up for auction and Sarah across the table ends up winning the auction, she pays me that money. She gets the cards that she bid for, but I get the cash. And so that's a really cool thing. It creates this dynamic in the auctions where you don't just call an auction if you want a card. You might want money, and you see someone on the other side of that table that you know is looking for this card. You see the thing they're building, and you can see, ooh, this last card in the auction here, this will definitely benefit them. And so I'm going to call for an auction on it because I need the cash, and you can maybe drive up the price, and eventually they'll pay that, and you are suddenly flush with money. It's a cool way to generate cash as well as put together parts for your rocket. It's one of my favorite systems in the game, actually. It is divisive. I know a lot of people don't like the auction in High Frontier. They think it's like incidental to the real game. But to me, the auction is the game in High Frontier. It sets up what you're able to put together. It sets up how you can kind of pull the strings of what your opponents can put together. And I think it's a really clever auction system that I like a whole lot. High Frontier also has a gorgeous map. This map, in addition to being the litmus test that I promote so strongly, is just a beautiful work of art. There are not many board game pieces that I would want to hang up on my wall, but I think I want to hang up the High Frontier map on my wall. I think I would love a copy of this without a lot of the game stuff printed on it, and just get like the routes and the sites and the names, and I would frame that and hang it on my wall. It is a beautiful piece of artwork, and the fact that it's a functional game component as well is incredible. Phil Eklund did a great job on this, and it's an old map too. The 4th edition map, they changed the colors a little bit, and I think it's the best looking of all the maps. But broadly speaking, this has been the High Frontier map for like over a decade, and I must commend Phil on getting this map together. It's gorgeous, it's amazing, it's super functional, and easier to use maybe than it initially looks. It looks like this crazy like mix of spaghetti or shoelaces, and it actually functions pretty handily. It's been sort of referred to as like a Candyland map in the past because you sort of just follow these routes around, and that's fine. It works really well, and it's kind of cool too. It is not a map of physical distance between sites, but instead is energy requirements to get to different sites. So it's cheaper to get to Jupiter than it is to get to Mercury from Earth, which is crazy to think of. But there's a lot of science put behind this game, a lot of real-world calculation and thought put behind this map. And so it feels like an educational tool as much as it is a beautiful art piece and a game component. And so the map of High Frontier is mwah. It is beautiful, it is perfect, and I hope it never changes. I've also got to give a ton of attention to the fuel strip of this game. This zigzaggy mess is brilliant and so efficient and so elegant. And elegant is not really a word I would typically use to describe High Frontier, but this fuel strip is great. It is very easy to use. It simply zigzags up and down, back and forth when you're expending fuel or when you are adding fuel to your rocket. But the way that it simulates how a lighter rocket is more efficient with fuel and a heavier rocket is less efficient with fuel, and how it affects your thrust power and how it affects what one tank of fuel is worth on a light ship versus a heavy ship. It is so great. It is such a good representation of how rocket fuel and rocket propellant can work. It is one of the nicest things in this game. Much like other parts of High Frontier, it looks insane, but it works super well. And it seems like a little thing maybe to call out next to like this grand sense of wonder and this like beautiful social interaction. But this one piece, this fuel strip, is incredible. It's an incredible piece of gaming mechanisms that has been kind of perfected over the last several editions. The theme and the gameplay of a lot of board games end up being kind of disparate. A lot of times you can appreciate a theme in a game, but when it comes time to actually playing it competitively or playing it well, a lot of times you see through the theme to the mechanics, or the mechanics sort of brush the theme out of the way. Despite the layers of mechanics and systems in High Frontier, once you understand it, all of that sort of melts away, and you get immersed so powerfully in the theme that Phil Eklund has put into High Frontier, all the research and personal experience that he's put into the game, it really comes through. And whenever I'm doing something in High Frontier, I feel like I'm doing it. Everything feels like mine. It feels like ideas that I've come up with, ships that I have put together, and missions that I am completing, and the mechanics of the game don't sully that. Take, for instance, the game I mentioned earlier, Food Chain Magnate, or really almost any title from Splotter. Mechanics always supersede theme, which isn't to say those games lack theme. I think they have pretty cool themes, generally speaking. Stuff like Indonesia and the Great Zimbabwe are themes that I like a lot. But you kind of see the gears turning more than you see what those gears represent. In High Frontier, I think the two are merged effortlessly. I don't really think of things often in terms of mechanics in High Frontier. I see the theme and the mechanics sort of logically attach themselves to that theme. One of the greatest challenges for kind of big space travel is getting stuff out of Earth's strong gravity well. It is very expensive to launch stuff out of Earth. And the game represents that. It costs you a lot of money to boost stuff out of Earth's atmosphere. But it is much cheaper to create things in space and launch them from those sites. And the game mirrors that. It creates that idea and it executes it really well. So the game sort of is broken into a couple of phases, not officially speaking, but there are certainly times when you can feel the tide shifting in the game, right? And early on, you're bidding on patents, you're struggling to get enough money together to boost stuff out of Earth because it's expensive. But once you make your first factory out in space, and you're able to create rocket parts at that factory, money becomes way less important in a lot of ways, because now you can create stuff in space and just fly it off of that site. You don't have to generate extra cash to boost it out of Earth. You can just kind of push it off of the edge of the asteroid and it takes off, right? And that's real. It is much cheaper to get stuff built and flying out in space than it is on Earth. And that's kind of like the future of rocket travel and exploration of our solar system, is being able to create rocket parts and rockets, functioning rockets, outside of Earth's atmosphere. And High Frontier very much replicates that, and I think gets that idea across super, super well, without even having to read all like the footnotes, which there are plenty of footnotes, and there's actually a whole appendix that'll describe all this kind of stuff to you, which is fantastic. I think the game itself gets those ideas across really well, and the way that it will integrate all this theme, this logical theme, into your head and allow you to spit it out as game mechanic is great. So those are a bunch of the things I like about High Frontier, but what don't I like about High Frontier? Now, broadly speaking, any edition of the game, it is powerfully hard to get into. Like I said earlier, I don't know that Space Diamonds, the introduction game that's been put into 4th edition, is going to be a super great intro into the rest of that High Frontier experience. I appreciate that it's there, but High Frontier is still a bear to get into. It is difficult to teach, it is a long teach, and newcomers will inevitably fail. And that can be super off-putting, which I understand completely. There are many people I've played this game with. Like I said, I've played it like 24 times now, often with different groups. And I've seen people fail hard and not want to come back to it. It can make you feel stupid. It can make you feel bad. Like you spend, an hour trying to figure something out. You think you have this piece, this rocket mission put together, and then you go to take off and you're halfway to your destination and you don't have enough fuel, or your rocket gets blown apart by a solar flare, or something else happens. You lose an auction to another player and you really wanted that card and now you don't know where to go from here. It can be really unforgiving in a lot of ways. And that can be a big turnoff for people. It can be a giant barrier to entry. And honestly, as a veteran player, if sometimes I'm just not in the mood to really pull myself up by my bootstraps after failing, it can be a bit of a bummer. It can be a bummer to start playing this game and have these big ideas in mind, and you get to the site that you're trying to claim as your own, and you fail your claim roll, your prospecting roll, and now you don't know where to go. It's like, well, I had a huge favorable chance to succeed here, and I failed. So now what do I do? And you see everyone else succeeding and you're failing. It can be demoralizing. And so high frontiers, again, really, really high highs and really, really low lows. And sometimes those lows are a bit of a bummer, whether you're new or whether you've been playing it for a long time. Now, I mentioned before that there are people that do not like the auction in High Frontier, the inherent auction in High Frontier. You can't really get around it. And I think a big part of that is because you can end up with a dead market if you are not experienced enough to know how to work around it, or if the shuffles have just not been kind to the players. You have a hand limit in this game that, well, it's sort of a hand limit. You can hold on to as many cards as you want to, but you cannot participate in auctions if you have 4 or more cards in your hand. What that means is if players bid on a bunch of stuff and they get their hands filled with cards and they're 1 or 2 cards off of being able to put together a good rocket, really their options can be sell some cards so they can bid on some more. And again, you get one, I didn't mention this, but you get 1 operation per turn. So my operation could be to auction a card, and that's all I get to do. Or my turn could be to sell a card, and that's all I'm getting to do with operations. And so you could end up in spots, and I certainly have been in games where this occurs, where you need to cycle that deck, and you just can't do it. And you need to spend so much extra time cycling the deck for cards that can benefit people. There's one faction that I mentioned earlier, the Shimizu, and their special ability is they are not limited for participating in auctions. They're not limited by their hands when it comes to participating in auctions. So if they're in the game, a big role they can have, a communal role sort of, is to cycle that deck. Because they can just keep bidding on stuff and getting cards, which will cycle the deck naturally. And they almost create a little market of their own that they can sell to other players. But if they're not there, the game can stagnate. There can be times when you need something and it's just not available and it's going to take you a third of the game just to get it. And there's not a lot you can do about that. There are random events that can shuffle decks a little, cycle through the decks. But again, they're random events. They can only happen every other turn, and there's only a 1 in 3 chance that that's even going to happen on that event roll. So, it can be a bummer when there are bad cards in the deck. If you are invested in the game, maybe you can look past that a little bit, but it is a reality. In a lot of ways, too, High Frontier's cards are not balanced. There are some that are just straight up better than others at doing what they're trying to do. A part of the game is working with what you have, and so sometimes that mirror steamer is not really what anyone wants, but hey, that's what you have. It's better to make it work than to wait for something else to come along. But again, in a competitive sense, that can be a little frustrating. Okay, so those are all things about High Frontier in general, but what about this edition of High Frontier 4? Well, I think that while the components in general are better than previous editions, there are a couple of them that I think are a little bit of a step back and maybe a little frustrating. The map is very, very slightly smaller than the 3rd edition map in terms of dimensions. The actual image is the same size. This is because the 3rd edition has a little black border around the whole map, whereas the 4th edition is printed edge to edge. So the dimensions, again, in the 4th are slightly smaller, almost negligibly smaller, and the actual image is the same size. However, the printing on the map is smaller. By printing, I mean the text. The text printing is a little smaller. I don't know why, necessarily. They use a different font, and it's a little bit smaller in general. Some sites, that makes it kind of hard to read. You might squint to find the name of the site you're looking for. And it's a strange choice. And the actual hexes for these sites are either the same size or even a tad smaller as well. But the components, in many cases, are a little larger than 3rd edition. For instance, these rockets are pretty chunky boys. And in some of the tighter sections of the map where there are a lot of spaces rockets can sit on, you're going to struggle if multiple players are going there, or if multiple players are hanging out in low Earth orbit. They're going to really occupy the space, and it can be hard to keep track of what's where. And if you're playing with an expansion that includes these Burnell space stations, they're huge. They have a giant footprint. In 3rd edition, they were little cylinders, and they sat pretty inconspicuously, and maybe were a little too inconspicuous. But in 4th edition, they're these really nicely crafted, well-modeled structures. They even come in 2 different versions. But they have this giant footprint. And if you get multiple players anchoring home Burnells around Earth, and they have their rockets there, and maybe they bring in this giant freighter cube, it becomes a mess. The map just doesn't feel like it is ready for components of this size. Even 2 rockets on the same site end up being a little bit cramped, let alone if you have multiple players going there. And now that doesn't happen often. It's not like it's going to happen. Even every game this might not happen. But I think players leaving low Earth orbit leaving LEO at the same time is definitely going to happen. And it can be a bit tricky to keep this all together. And remember, not get stuff bumped around. Now, 3rd edition had a reverse large map. You could combine 2 boards into a giant High Frontier map. It's the same locations you go to, the sizes are just physically larger, which was great. I always played on this version. I unfortunately have a big table, and so I can fit this on my table. But 4th edition doesn't have that. It is an aftermarket option. You can buy a large neoprene mat that I think is about the same size as this 3rd edition giant map. I don't have it, I haven't seen it, I can't look at it and show you it exactly, but I can compare the 3rd edition giant map to the 4th edition map, the regular map, and you can see that these components will fit pretty comfortably on the giant hexes. And so I'm hoping that the neoprene mat that Ion is selling will kind of get rid of my worries and my concerns about the base map. Additionally, the water beads that are used for currency and fuel in this game, they made them really round. They do have a flat side, so they'll sit flat and not roll around on a table, but they are pretty darn spherical. And this makes them, on occasion, a little hard to hold on to. And if they fall off your table onto a hard surface, good luck finding them. On a couple of occasions, I've dropped 1 or 2 of them, and I'm pretty sure I've lost a couple. I'm pretty sure I lost a couple on my very first play with this copy. I have stone floors, and once this bead hit, it was gone. I'm hoping that my cat will find it and play around with it, and I'll be able to recover it. But the round pieces, they're just not great. They're this round plastic that just bounces and doesn't hold well. You can't stack them. If you look at them compared to the 3rd edition water pieces, which were flatter, those stacked, those didn't bounce as much, and I think overall were better. I don't know why they switched to this size, maybe because they look more like a water drop a little bit, but in general, I think these water beads are a downgrade, and I might start using my 3rd edition water beads in my 4th edition game. And then there's the talk of expansions. So High Frontier 4 was designed to be modular, which, honestly, High Frontier 3 is modular. It just all comes in the same box. But you don't have to play with everything in that box. High Frontier 4 decided to break it out a little bit, so you get the base box, and that has the core game and the politics module in it. And the politics module, I think, is improved quite a bit over the 3rd edition or 2nd edition even, and I would probably play with the politics module every time in a multiplayer game. In a solo game, which is what I've been playing a lot of lately, I don't use it, but in multiplayer games on Tabletop Simulator right now, we use it every time, and I think the politics module is quite good. But the other modules that were available in 3rd edition have been broken out into expansions. Terawatts and Futures and Colonization. Not everyone is going to want those extra pieces, and so they're sort of optional. They've kept the cost down a little bit on the core box, and I think that they're worthwhile. I think those modules are good, and I would definitely recommend them to people super into High Frontier, but they're not necessary. The core game comes with a ton of stuff, and enough stuff to play for a long, long time. And they're actually priced pretty competitively. The modules, I think, are like $20 a piece, which is pretty darn good. You're just going to get a few cards. In the case of the terawatts and futures, you just get a few cards and some wooden bits. In the colonization, you get more cards, and you get those Burnell modules that I showed you earlier. Neither of them include a ton of stuff components-wise, but they do include some pretty significant gameplay changes. Neither are essential. I will say again, neither expansion is essential. You are not missing out by not having them. The core box is fantastic. And so just know that they're there, and they do expand the game pretty nicely. If I had to recommend one, it would probably be colonization. I think the Burnells and the colonists add more than the gigawatt thrusters and freighters and futures, but both are certainly good. Alright, so obviously I like High Frontier a whole lot. I've liked High Frontier previously. I like it even more now. I said at the jump that I think 4 is the best the game's ever been, and I'm hoping that you guys can understand why. As far as the production goes, I think it is probably the best produced High Frontier in many ways, but not every way. It's got some component bits that I'm not super thrilled with, but the art, the clarity on stuff, like you can stack cards now. You can sort of fan them out in a way where they take up less physical space, but you can see all the info on them, which is great. The cards are the cards. In 3rd edition, they were like sort of split up between the basic game information and the advanced game information. So like the cards were playing double duty in 3rd edition. 4th edition, the cards are the cards. If you're playing a variant, it has its own deck of cards. Like Space Diamonds has its own cards. Race for Glory has its own cards. And then the core game, the High Frontier, has its own cards. So you don't have to like ignore bits of info, which is great. The card stock is amazing. These might be the nicest cards I've ever like handled. They are really thick. They have like a gloss finish, which maybe I'm not super into. I like the linen finish on cards, but these still feel fantastic in the hand. And I probably won't sleeve them just because they feel so nice to hold. The price is really good. I think $70 for this game is pretty darn affordable. If you're interested in High Frontier from a newbie's perspective, I mean, this is the only one you can buy if you don't go to the aftermarket. But I would say this is the one I'd recommend even if they were all available, just brand new, openly. 4th edition is the one you want. It's got the most refined rules. It's got rules that actually read pretty easily. It's got a bunch of content in it, and that content's the best it's ever been. Even if you're playing 3rd edition, I might recommend using the 4th edition rules as best you can, because 4th edition's rules are they're smoother in a lot of ways, and they're laid out in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. Now, if you have an older version of this game, do you need to buy this? I guess let's start in the beginning. If you have Rocket Flight, aka Lords of the High Frontier, should you get High Frontier 4th edition? Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Rocket Flight is a much different game than High Frontier, so it's not going to replace Rocket Flight, I don't think. I don't think this replaces Rocket Flight. It is just a much different game. So if you're interested in it, yeah, absolutely go check out High Frontier. It is maybe less social than Rocket Flight, but it is a bigger scope and scale and is, I think, the better game. If you have High Frontier 1st edition or 2nd edition, should you upgrade to this? I guess my question would be to you is, how do you feel about it? What are you looking for? Because the game has changed quite a bit since High Frontier 1 or 2. It's added new types of burns, it's added new cards, it's added a bunch of stuff. And I think it is the better version. If the reason you still have High Frontier 1 or 2 when you've never upgraded to 3 is because you're not playing High Frontier 1 or 2, like maybe it's too intimidating, maybe you could never really understand the rules and you felt like you were getting frustrated trying to learn the game, yeah, pick up 4. 4's rules are much better. They are much easier to understand. They make more sense. In general, I would say it is an upgrade from 2nd edition or 1st edition, full stop. If you have 3rd edition, should you upgrade to 4th edition? And that's a little bit harder to answer because the two are actually pretty similar in a lot of ways, especially the core game. If you are not playing with stuff like Burnells or Colonists and all that, I would say 3rd edition and 4th edition are pretty darn similar. I think that you get a cleaner rule set, but again, a lot of it's compatible with 3rd edition. You get an expanded map in terms of it has a new spectral type on it, an H type, which the 3rd edition does not have. So you get some more options in the cards. The cards have been rebalanced a little bit. And it's got a new politics module. The 3rd edition politics aren't very good, I don't think, but 4th editions are, I think, pretty darn good. And again, I would use them every multiplayer play. I'd play with politics. So I would say if you have 3rd edition and you like it, consider 4th edition. Not necessarily run out and buy it. 1st edition or 2nd edition High Frontier, if you're itching for a new version, go get 4th edition. It's great. If you have 3rd edition, though, and you're thinking about 4th, try to maybe incorporate some of the 4th edition rule set. Now, there is an upgrade kit as well. I don't have the upgrade kit. I've seen what it comes with. It comes with, like, the politics module and some like bits, some component bits. That feels like a waste to me, honestly. It's like $40, I think. And for another $30, you would just get the full game. I don't know that the upgrade kit, from what I've seen of it, again, I don't have it on hand, but from what I've seen of it, I don't know that the upgrade kit is a worthwhile purchase from 3rd to 4th. I think you could just play 3rd and use some of the rules from 4th. And so, yeah, I guess that's where I would stand with upgrades. 1st or 2nd edition, probably do it. 3rd edition, consider it. It is better than 3rd edition. But if you're playing with the core game, I don't know that it's super worth it. Now, if you are the kind of person that plays with the colonists and Brunels and Terawatts and futures and all that, then I would actually say, yeah, 4th edition is a worthwhile upgrade. They've cleaned up the expansion stuff, the module stuff, quite a bit. And I think they're better. They're straight up better. The rules are cleaner. The options you have are more competitive and are better rules. And yeah, I would say if you're playing 3rd edition with everything, 4th edition is your game. You should if you have the money and the inclination and you play it enough, pick up 4th edition. But that's it. That's what I've got to say about High Frontier. I hope that helped you guys a little bit in your considerations for buying the game. If you had never heard of it before and for some reason stumbled into this review, I hope it gave you some idea of what High Frontier is about. And if you were on the fence about it, I hope it pushed you one way or the other. It is not a simple game. Even though this High Frontier says it's for all, I don't know that it is necessarily. I think that it is maybe for more people. It's certainly for me. But don't expect this to have a super easy, like, step 1, step 2, step 3, you're playing the full thing in a day entry point. It has some entry-level stuff, but you're still going to have a big speed bump that you got to get over. I think it's a speed bump very much worth getting over. I don't think it's often that games come along that are so well put together, both in terms of theme and mechanics, that have such long legs. I feel like this is a game, like I said, I've played it about 24 times right now between 3rd edition and 4th edition, and I feel like I could play it another 24 times and still be discovering new things in this game. It has a scope and a vision unlike any other game I've played. And not only that, but it achieves it so exactly that I feel like everyone should at least take a look at this game. You might not like it. You might run away from it screaming when you see the map, but at least look at the map. Because High Frontier is something special. And it is an important piece of art, I think, to me. It's an important contribution to the board gaming world. And I think, again, the 4th edition is the best this game's ever been. And so if you're thinking about it, go pick it up. It is absolutely worth your time and your money and your investment. Now, if you liked that review, consider supporting the channel. You can just subscribe to the channel. That's real cool. If you want to support it financially, go to phasingplayer.com/donate for a couple of options in ways you can. Throw some cash my way. Help me add to the channel. Help me pick up new lights, which I have over here. Invest in new games that I can bring you guys. I'm always looking for strange stuff out there or cool stuff out there to bring to the channel. And your support is what helps me do those kinds of things. So thanks a whole lot, everyone. And I will see you on the next video.